Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to turn to Simon Rose of Save Our Savers. Simon Rose, welcome back.
Thank you, Max.
All right, now, you were over at Parliament. We see the building right behind us, and you were testifying on the impact of quantitative easing. You said it was a monumental mistake. Please elaborate.
Yes. Well, the Treasury Select Committee decided last year that it might actually be worth looking into whether quantitative easing had been as wonderful as the Bank of England claimed. There was some thought that possibly not everybody had benefited from it. So they asked the bank to produce some document about how it affected everybody. And the bank effectively came back and said, well, it's really boosted asset prices, and it's particularly boosted the asset prices of the wealthiest 5% in the country. If you actually look at the numbers, of course, I guess we found that 72% of all the UK's net financial assets and pension fund wealth is held by the wealthiest 20% of people. Well, the bank claims this has been absolutely fantastic for everybody, ignoring what's happened to the majority of the people who are in the 80% who have, of course, lost out. So they produced this document, which basically said, if we'd not done quantitative easing, the world would have ended, there'd have been dragons in the sky, fissures would have opened up in the earth, and we'd have all gone to hell.
The quantitative easing is basically an industrial policy. It's cooked up by the government to help a few bankers. It has no application for the real economy. And just to give some look at the numbers here, I noticed that the Bank of England itself put out a report saying that, sure, lowering interest rates has saved $70 billion in mortgage costs and other interest-related costs, but the impact on savers, if you include the loss to pension accounts, as you just mentioned, plus if you add the amount of money that corporations have had to move out of their working capital into their pensions, which are now falling. Okay, if you put those two numbers together, which was covered in The Economist magazine also, you end up with 140 billion pounds. So for every pound they save on interest, they lose 2 pounds from the real economy. Now what kind of fucking what kind of morons don't know how to add or subtract? What's this all about? Is the Parliament, are they that stupid?
Well, this is why the Treasury Select Committee is looking into it. And I have to say, they are relatively sympathetic towards savers. It's nice that somebody is at least bringing this to the public attention.
They're sympathetic towards savers the way Jimmy Savile is sympathetic to children.
Well, I was going to say, it may well end up being the way that the UN is sympathetic towards people that are being massacred, but yes, either analogy will do. But yeah, the other thing in the report, of course, they say, well, savers have lost about 70 billion because they're getting less in interest rates. They ignore the fact that quantitative easing is an inflationary policy, and as a result, savers have lost out massively because of the cost and the price of living going up. I mean, it's ludicrous. Everybody loses out to an inflationary policy when wages are not actually rising anything like as much as inflation is. But don't worry, the top 5% of the people, they're getting much, much wealthier. So it's working.
Right. The bond market, of course, is now starting to come unglued. The economy is now in one quarter of what will soon be 2 quarters of a triple-dip recession. So it didn't even help the economy. It caused a bond bubble, which bursting. The economy is sinking, and the savers are being penalized. Now, there's an interesting study, of course, that said if they just let interest rates remain at 5% and let banks take the hit, like Iceland did. You know, Iceland are made of men. They're not made of parliamentary wusses. You've got a policy that's ended up bankrupting the company and the country, and there's absolutely no policy going forward to rectify the situation.
It's a policy of pain relief. It's like giving a terminally ill patient morphine and saying, well, they're not complaining about the pain anymore, so they must be getting better. They haven't actually put anything right that was wrong 5 years ago.
Now,
Nothing.
They do blame the so-called moochers. There's a big conversation happening in the UK about all the moochers living on the dole. But isn't much of the city activity really a form of living off the dole?
It's a very interesting concept. I hadn't thought about that. Just rather more expensive moochers, I think.
But isn't that true? They are moochers. They're living on the dole. They're being given money. When a quantitative easing is you know, it's your disability payment.
Well, they're claiming it's not printing money, but effectively that's exactly what it is. 375 billion pounds of new money.
Their balance sheets increased by hundreds of billions of pounds. That came from the central bank.
It hasn't made the economy any wealthier. So if some of these people are getting much richer, it'll only be because the rest of us are getting much poorer. No, it's actually because the one reason they claim it's not printing money is because they can reverse it. You can imagine, can you? The Bank of England is actually sitting on 1/3 of the stock of UK gilts. And one day they're going to say, well, we're going to try selling them now. What on earth is going to happen to gilt prices?
Right, they're already starting to fall, and they're already starting to. The credit rating, of course, for the UK is set to be downgraded. Again, going from negative watch to outright negative, loss of the AAA rating. And you have this, of course, with Europe now, which could be a potential buyer of these bonds. They're splitting from continental Europe. So who would be the buyer of these bonds? Will it come to the point where the government, by edict, forces pension funds that are in, let's say, portfolios of things other than government bonds, that they'll just put a gun to their head and say, you have to buy these government bonds? We've seen that in Argentina.
Well, we're in financial repression already of some sort, but it hasn't become incredibly severe. Unless they recognize their mistakes, which quite clearly they are not going to do, all they can do is get more repressive. I hate to think what is going to happen, but they're showing almost no sign. Now, there's a little chink here or there. Mervyn King is about to retire and go off and dig his allotment for the rest of his days, and he is now saying some moderately sensible things, but not at any stage by admitting that he was responsible.
He's out the door. He's leaving.
So he's what he said in the Economic Club in New York in December.
He's one of these British, like the BBC. They say, when they're out the door, they say, oh, the BBC did all these horrible things. Bye, see ya. They never do anything while they're actually in office.
Unfortunately, that is true. But he says, we need to raise our national saving ratio. But what seems to be the right thing to do in the short term to maintain support for aggregate demand is absolutely the opposite of what we know we need to do in the long term. In other words, what we're doing is really bad from the economy, but we feel it's the best thing to do in the short term. Well, 5 years is short term so far. How long is the short term going to last?
Well, what about this idea of stimulating aggregate demand in an economy that doesn't generate any supply? In other words, an economy is demand and supply being the stuff you manufacture and export. The UK, if you take out the, has been in a negative export of manufactured goods for something like 12 or 13 years, with one very small bubble recently in terms of cars. But the services industry, which is financial fraud that they export, take that out, they're not exporting really anything, except bombs when they go invade people. So there's no supply. So when they say they're going to stimulate demand to buy stuff that's manufactured elsewhere.
It's completely absolutely completely the wrong way around.
The economy.
That's right.
They want to stimulate China's economy. That's what they're doing. They're stimulating China's economy.
Why do you not apply for the role of Governor of the Bank of England?
Well, why would they? That's tyranny. You see? I mean, it's a parliament. It's supposed to be democratic. But yet they're working for Chinese people. They're working for Asian people to stimulate demand of their products and obliterating the manufacturing and wages for supply-driven economic manufacturing health in this country. That's tyrannical. That's not just irresponsible. And, well, why would they do it? Because they get bribe money, because they're wealthy, they get fat on it, because they're crooks.
And as was said by one of the MPs at the Treasury Select Committee, at least, we've got lower interest rates, that helps growth, which I had to challenge. And, of course, we've not suffered a massive increase in unemployment. Well, no, but our productivity is going down all the time. This is a zombie economy. In fact, it's a zombie economy that's even having trouble walking towards you at pace. It's lying down.
No, I saw Prime Minister Question Time, and David Cameron's up there, pounding the table. We increase jobs. We increase jobs. He didn't mention that wages are falling precipitously. That these are part-time jobs. These are not jobs with benefits attached. These are McDonald's is hiring 2,500 people. Okay, but even if McDonald's hired 500,000 new employees, they would not generate enough tax revenue to bring the UK economy out of its current deficit.
Yeah.
So those jobs will never bring the economy out of deficit. Yeah. They'll never work. It never generates taxable income to take them out of the deficit.
And they don't seem to understand either the importance of savings. That's the other thing I had to explain. It's all very well having negative real interest rates and savers.
Who was on this panel? Some of them are old, codgy lords, and they just sit around.
Look, I quite like the Treasury Select Committee. They're the only people we've got in this country who can actually challenge. Well, Andrew Tirry runs it.
Who's he?
Andrea Leadsom. He's the chairman of the Treasury Select Committee.
Is he an MP somewhere?
He is an MP.
Yes,
where? You have to be an MP to be on the committee.
Where is his constituency?
I can't remember where his constituency is. But I think he's a good egg. And most of them are trying to hold the Bank of England to account. Now, I don't know what they'll be able to do in the end, but surely it's better for them actually to oversee quantitative easing and to try and turn over the rock and have a look underneath than just to ignore it.
Okay, well, is this like another one of these committees, like the Levinson Committee or this committee or that committee? It's a talk fest, a chin wag, do nothing, status quo perpetuates.
Okay, in that defense, let us wait and see. It's going to go on for a while. You're probably going to be right, but I would actually like to see that.
All right, well, you're doing
it may well be that they were so swayed by my argument that if you actually undermine savings, you undermine the whole economy because you are decapitalizing it. They may have gone back that evening and thought, you know, that guy Simon Rose is absolutely right. I'm going to change my view. We're going to tell Mark Carney, I'm sorry, but you've got to stick to inflation. It's in the Bank of England Act, 2%. Stick to it. Stop letting it run out of control. And he'll have to listen. Okay, so it may be that, and pigs may fly.
What is Mark Carney's coming in? There's talk of adopting what's called nominal GDP growth, getting away from inflation targeting. Can you summarize what that? It sounds to me as if they're just making another excuse to print more money.
Well, I'm sure that's exactly what it is. But like as with quantitative easing, what they're going to do is cloak it in a nice name that nobody really understands, so nobody appreciates what's happened until it's too late, and the inflation ketchup is out of the bottle.
Okay, now let's talk about another fraud here. I think you've been covering also interest rate swap scam. There isn't an argument that can be made for more credit. So the Bank of England creates this point. The more fraud is committed by those receiving that credit. In other words, okay, they are releasing more money into the system. They've got quantitative easing. Interest rates are cheap. But then that is being packaged as interest rates.
Wow. Yeah, this was the banks. This is not really my bailiwick. But yes, essentially they were selling relatively simple business people incredibly complicated interest rate swaps.
If interest rates went higher, doesn't it neutralize the ability of peddling this type of fraud?
I don't even understand them well enough to know. All I know is that what happened, of course, interest rates went down. People tried to get out of it. And, of course, there was this massive penalty clause in the small print saying, well, you've got to actually pay a fortune to actually unwind the position that you shouldn't have been sold in the first place.
I can tell you from my experience that if rates went up, like you're arguing to save the savers. Simon Rose is saving the savers. If interest rates went up, this type of fraud would be obliterated because this is the way they make an arbitrage between the rates between the central bank and the investment banks, and they create these scams, and then they load it up on the balance sheets of these poor companies, and they Jimmy Savile. All right, so finally,
so yet more mis-selling by the banks, yet more fines are going to be imposed on the banks. And who ends up paying in the end? It's not the bankers. Yeah. It's you and me. It's the taxpayer.
What about this?
I mean, it's just ludicrous.
RBS, wait. RBS is 82% owned by the public here. After the big scandal, they got involved in the LIBOR mess.
Yes.
Which is now they're going to have to pay $800 million in penalties. Yeah. So that means the U.S. taxpayer that owns a bank are going to have to pay off a scandal that happened after they was discovered that they were already involved in other scandals going back to 2008. What are the savers doing about this? What are the people doing about this?
There's nothing you can do about the banks. It doesn't matter. Have you noticed no matter what happens, they don't come out smelling roses, but when was the last time a banker actually, except in Iceland, you mentioned before, paid a penalty for anything? But I've got a great idea. Let's bring back the stocks. Bank of England keeps talking about wanting to restore confidence. I would feel a lot confident if some of these people actually got put in the stocks and we could go make fun of them. And here's a way to boost the economy. We had a terrible summer last year. Farmers can't sell rotten fruit and vegetable. Well, that's a great source of demand for rotten fruit and vegetable. I think that would be very good. People will pay a fortune if they can actually start flinging rotten fruit and veg at the people that got us into this.
It's a new definition for stocks and bonds. Yeah. I'm with you, buddy.
Great.
Just put them in there and just pelt them with rotten tomatoes.
Yeah. It would really cheer me up immensely.
They would probably enjoy it, because they're all into that S&M anyway. They're all kinky little banking.
They'll find a way to make money out of it.
Fair enough. All right, Simon Rose, thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. And I want to thank my guest, Simon Rose of Save Our Savers. If you'd like to contact us, please tweet us at Kaiser Report or at facebook.com/Kaiser Report. Until next time, Max Kaiser saying bye, y'all.